When the knocking started at his hut door, Max almost didn't answer it. "Go away," he almost said, because lately it was only kids come to mock him. Except this was a little past the time for kids being up. It was almost midnight, and besides, the knocking was both loud and, at the same time, rat-a-tatty, as if the brain was saying to the first, "Hurry it up, I want to see a little action." So Max opened the door a peek's worth. "I don't know you." "Aren't you Miracle Max that worked all those years for the king?" the skinny guy said. "I got fired. Didn't you hear? That's a painful subject. You shouldn't have brought it up. Good night. Next time, learn a little manners." And he closed the hut door. Rat-a-tat, rat-a-tat. "Get away, I'm telling you, or I'll call the brute squad." "I am on the brute squad," this other voice said from outside the door, a big deep voice that you wanted to stay friendly with. "We need a miracle. It's very important," the skinny guy said from outside. "I'm retired," Max said. "Anyway, you wouldn't want someone the king got rid of, would you? I might kill whoever you want me to miracle." "He is already dead," the skinny guy said. "He is, huh?" Max said, a little interest in his voice. He opened the door a peek's worth again. "I'm good at dead." "Please," the skinny guy said. "Bring him in." "I'm making no promises," Miracle Max answered after some thought. This huge guy and the skinny guy brought in this big guy and put him on the hut floor. Max poked the corpse. "Not so stiff as some," he said. The skinny guy said, "We have money." "Then go get some great genius specialist, why don't you? Why waste time messing around with me, a guy who the king fired?" It almost killed him when it happened. For the first 2 years, he wished it had. His teeth fell out from gnashing. He pulled the few loyal tufts from his scalp in wild anger. "You're the only miracle man left alive in Florin," the skinny guy said. "Oh, so that's why you come to me." One of you said, "Well, what'll we do with this corpse?" And the other one said, "Let's take a flyer on that miracle man the king fired." And the first one probably said, "Well, what do we got to lose? He can't kill a corpse." And the other one probably said, "You were a wonderful miracle man," the skinny guy said. "It was all politics that got you fired." "Don't insult me and say wonderful. I was great. I am great. There was never, you hear me, sonny, a miracle man could match me. Half the miracle techniques I invented. And then they fired me." Suddenly his voice trailed off. He was very old and weak, and the effort at passionate speech had drained him. "Sir, please sit down," the skinny guy said. "Don't sir me, sonny," Miracle Max said. He was tough when he was young, and he was still tough. "I got work to do. I was feeding my witch when you came in. I got to finish that now." And he lifted up the trap door and took the ladder down into the cellar, locking the trap door behind him. When that was done, he put his finger to his lips and ran to the old woman cooking hot chocolate over the coals. Max had married Valerie back 1,000,000 years ago. It seemed like at miracle school, where she worked as a potion ladler. She wasn't, of course, a witch. But when Max started practice, every miracle man had to have one. So, since Valerie didn't mind, he called her a witch in public, and she learned enough of the witch trade to pass herself off as one under pressure. Listen, Max whispered, gesturing repeatedly towards the hut upstairs. "Upstairs, you'll never guess what I got. A giant and a spick." "A giant on a stick?" Valerie said, clutching her heart. Her hearing wasn't what it once was. Spick, a Spanish fella." Pardon if that's not entirely politically correct. I didn't write the book. "Scars and everything. A very tough cookie." "Let them steal what they want. What do we have worth fighting over?" "They don't want to steal. They want to buy. Me. They got a corpse up there and they want a miracle." "You're always good at dead," Valerie said. She hadn't seen him trying so hard not to seem excited since the firing had all but done him in. She very carefully kept her own excitement under control. If only he would work again. Her Max was a genius. They'd all come back, every patient. Max would be honored again, and they could move out of the hut. In the old days, the hut was where they tried experiments. Now it was home. You had nothing else pressing on for the evening. Why not take the case? I could. I admit that, no question. But suppose I did. You know human nature. They'd probably try getting out of it without paying. How can I force a giant to pay if he doesn't want to? Who needs that kind of grief? I'll send them on their way, and you can bring me up a nice cup of chocolate. Besides, I was halfway through an article on eagle's claws that was very well written. Go get the money in advance. Go. Demand. If they say no, out with them. If they say yes, bring the money down to me. I'll feed it to the frog. They'll never find it if they change their mind and try to rob it back. Max started back up the ladder. What should I ask for? I haven't done a miracle. It is, 3 years now. Prices may have skyrocketed. 50, you think? If they got 50, I'll consider. If not, out they go. Right, Valerie agreed. And the minute Max had shut the trapdoor, she clambered silently up the ladder and pressed her ear to the ceiling. Sir, we're in a terrible rush, so, this one voice said. Don't you hurry me, sonny. You hurry a miracle man and you get rotten miracles. Is that what you want? You'll do it then? I didn't say I'd do it, sonny. Don't try pressuring a miracle man. Not this one. You try pressuring me, out you go. How much money you got? Give me your money, Fezzik, the same voice said again. Here's all I've got, this great voice boomed. You counted, Inigo. There was a pause. 65 is what we've got, the one called Inigo said. Valerie was about to clap her hands with joy when Max said, I never worked for anything that little in my life. You gotta be joking. Excuse me again. I gotta belch my witch. She's done eating by now. Valerie hurried back to the coals and waited until Max joined her. No good, he said. They only got 20. Valerie stirred away from the stove. She knew the truth, but dreaded having to say it. So she tried another trick. We're practically out of chocolate powder. 20 could sure be a help at the barterers tomorrow. No chocolate powder? Max said, visibly upset. Chocolate was one of his favorites, right after cough drops. Maybe if it was a good cause, you could lower yourself to work for 20, Valerie said. Find out why they need the miracle. They'd probably lie. Use the bellows cram if you're in doubt. Look, I would hate to have it on my conscience if we didn't do a miracle when nice people were involved. You're a pushy lady, Max said, but he went back upstairs. Okay, he said to the skinny guy. What's so special I should bring back out of all the hundreds of people pestering me every day for miracles this particular fella? And believe me, it better be worthwhile. Inigo was about to say, so he can tell me how to kill Rugen. But that didn't sound like the type of thing that would strike a cranky miracle man as aiding the general betterment of mankind. So, he said, he's got a dead wife, he's got 15 kids. They haven't had a shred of food. If he stays dead, they'll starve. So, oh, Sonny, you are a liar, Max said. And he went to the corner and got out a huge bellows. I'll ask him, Max grunted, lifting the bellows towards Wesley. He's a corpse. He cannot talk, Inigo said. We got our ways, was all Max would answer. And he struck the huge bellows way down into Wesley's throat and started to pump. You see, Max explained as he pumped, there's different kinds of dead. There's sort of dead, mostly dead, and all dead. This fella here, he's only sort of dead, which means there's still a memory inside. There's still bits of brain. You apply a little pressure here, a little more there. Sometimes you get results. Wesley was beginning to swell now from all the pumping. What are you doing? Fezzik said, starting to get upset. Never mind. I'm just filling his lungs. I guarantee you it ain't hurting him. He stopped pumping the bellows after a few moments more, and then started shouting into Wesley's ear. What's so important? What's here worth coming back for? What you got waiting for you? Max carried the bellows back to the corner and then got out a pen and paper. It takes a while for that to work its way out, so you might as well answer me some questions. How well do you know this guy? Inigo didn't much want to answer that, since it might have sounded strange admitting that they'd only met once alive, and then to duel to the death. How do you mean exactly? He replied. Well, for example, Max said, was he ticklish or not? Ticklish? Inigo exploded angrily. Ticklish! Life and death are all around, and you talk about ticklish? Don't you yell at me, Max exploded right back. And don't you mock my methods. Tickling can be terrific in the proper instances. I had a corpse once, worse than this fella, mostly dead he was, and I tickled him and tickled him and tickled his toes and I tickled his armpits and his ribs, and I got a peacock feather and I went after his belly button. I worked all day, I worked all night, and the following dawn, mark me, this corpse said, I just hate that. And I said, hate what? And he said, being tickled. I've come all the way back from the dead to ask you to stop. And I said, you mean this? This thing I'm doing right now with the peacock feather, it bothers you? He said, you couldn't guess how much it bothers me. And of course, I just kept on asking him questions about tickling, making him talk back to me, answer me, because I don't have to tell you. Once you get a corpse really caught up in a conversation, your battle's half over. True love. Fezzik grabbed onto Inigo in panic, and they both pivoted, staring at the man in black, who was silent again. True love, he said, Inigo cried. You heard him. True love is what he wants to come back for. That's certainly worthwhile. Sonny, don't you tell me what's worthwhile. True love is the best thing in the world, except for cough drops. Everybody knows that. Then you'll save him, Fezzik said. Yeah, absolutely, I would save him if he had said true love. But you misheard. Whereas I, being an expert on the bellows cram, will tell you what any qualified tongue man will only be happy to verify, namely, that the F sound is the hardest for corpses to master, and that it therefore comes out with a the. And what your friend said was to blow, by which he meant, obviously, to bluff. Clearly, he is either involved in a shady business deal or a card game and wishes to win, and that is certainly not reason enough for a miracle. I'm sorry, I never change my mind once it's made up. Goodbye, take your corpse with you. Liar! Liar! Shrieked suddenly from the now open trap door. Miracle Max whirled. Back, witch, he commanded. I'm not a witch. I'm your wife. She was advancing on him now, an ancient, tiny fury. And after what you've just done, I don't think I want to be that anymore. Miracle Max tried to calm her, but she was having none of it. He said, true love, Max. Even I could hear it. True love, true love. Don't go on, Max said. And now there was pleading coming from somewhere. Valerie turned towards Inigo. He's rejecting you because he's afraid. He's afraid he's done, that the miracles are gone from his once majestic fingers. Not true, Max said. You're right, Valerie agreed. Valerie agreed. It isn't true. They never were majestic. Max, you were never any good. The ticklish cure. You were there. You saw. A fluke. All the drowners, I returned. Chance. Valerie, we've been married 80 years. How can you do this to me? Because true love is expiring, and you haven't got the decency to tell why you don't help. Well, I do, and I say this. Prince Humperdinck was right to fire you. Don't say that name in my hut, Valerie. You made a pledge to me you never breathe that name. Prince Humperdinck, Prince Humperdinck, Prince Humperdinck. At least he knows a phony when he sees one. Max fled towards the trapdoor, his hands going to his ears. But this is his fiancée's true love, Inigo said. If you bring him back to life, he will stop Prince Humperdinck's marriage. Max's hands left his ears. This corpse here? He comes back to life and Prince Humperdinck suffers? Humiliations galore, Indigo said. Now that's what I call a worthwhile reason, Miracle Max said. Give me the 65. I'm on the case. He knelt beside Wesley. He said. What? Valerie said. She knew that tone. While you were doing all that talking, he slipped from sort of to mostly dead. Valerie tapped Wesley in a couple of places. Stiffening, she said. You'll have to work around that. Max did a few taps himself. Do you suppose the oracle's still up? Valerie looked at the clock. I don't think so. It's almost 1. Besides, I don't trust her all that much anymore. Max nodded. I know, but it would have been nice to have a little advance hint on whether this is going to work or not. He rubbed his eyes. I'm tired going in. I wish I'd known in advance about this job. I could have napped this afternoon. He shrugged. Can't be helped. Down is down. Get me my encyclopedia of spells and the hex appendix. I thought you knew all about this kind of thing, Inigo said, starting to get upset himself now. I'm out of practice. Retired. It's been 3 years. You can't mess around with these resurrection recipes. One little ingredient wrong and the whole thing blows up in your face. Here's the hex book and your glasses, Valerie puffed, coming up the basement ladder. As Max began thumbing through, she turned to Inigo and Fezzik, who were hovering. You can help, she said. Anything, Fezzik said. Tell us whatever's useful. How long do we have for the miracle? If we work it. When we work it, Max said from his hex book. His voice was growing stronger. When we work it, Valerie went on. How long does it have to maintain full efficiency? Just exactly what's going to be done? Well, it's hard to predict, Inigo said, since the first thing we have to do is storm the castle, and you never can be really sure how these things work out. An hour pill should be about right, Valerie said. Either it's going to be plenty or you'll both be dead, so why not say an hour? We'll all 3 be fighting, Inigo corrected. And then, once we storm the castle, we have to stop the wedding, steal the princess, and make our escape, allowing space somewhere in there for me to duel Count Rugen. Visibly, Valerie's energy drained. She sat wearily down. Max, she said, tapping his shoulder. No good. He looked up. Huh? They need a fighting corpse. Max shut the hex book. No good, he said. No good, he said. But I bought a miracle, Inigo insisted. I paid you 65. Look here, Valerie thumped Wesley's chest. Nothing. You ever hear anything so hollow? This man's life's been sucked away. It'll take months before there's strength again. We haven't got months. It's after 1 now, and the wedding's at 6 tonight. What parts can we hope to have in working order in 17 hours? Well, Max said, considering. Certainly the tongue. Absolutely the brain. And with luck, maybe a little slow walk if you nudge him gently in the right direction. Inigo looked at Fezzik in despair. What can I tell you? Max said. You needed a phantasmagoria. And you never could have gotten one of those for 65, Valerie added consolingly. Little cut here, 20 pages maybe. What happens basically, this is our author, by the way. What happens basically is an alternation of scenes. What's going on in the castle, then what's the situation with the Miracle Man, back and forth. And with every shift, he gives the time, sort of, there were now 11 hours until 6 o'clock, that kind of thing. Morgenstern uses the device mainly because what he's really interested in, as always, as this is the satiric anti-royalty stuff and how stupid they were going through with all these old traditions, kissing the sacred ring of the great-grandfather, so-and-so, etc. There is some action stuff, which I cut, which I never did anywhere else, and here's my logic. Inigo and Fezzik have to go through a certain amount of daring-do in order to come up with the proper ingredients for the resurrection pill. Stuff like Inigo finding some frog dust while Fezzik is off after a Holocaust mud. This latter, for example, requiring first Fezzik's acquiring a Holocaust cloak so he doesn't burn to death gathering the mud. Well, it's my conviction that this is the same kind of thing as the Wizard of Oz sending Dorothy's friend to the Wicked Witch's castle. It's got the same feel, if you know what I mean. And I didn't want to risk When the book's building to a climax, the reader's saying, "Oh, this is just like the Oz books." Here's the kicker, though. Morgenstern's Florinese version came out before Baum wrote The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, so in spite of the fact that he was the originator, it comes out just the other way around. It would be nice if somebody, maybe a PhD candidate on the loose, did a little something for Morgenstern's reputation, because believe me, if being ignored is suffering, this guy has suffered. The other reason I made the cut is this. You just know that the resurrection pill has got to work. You don't spend all this time with a nutty couple like Max and Valerie to have it fail. At least a whiz like Morgenstern doesn't. One last thing. Hiram, my editor, felt the Miracle Max section was too Jewish in sound, too contemporary. I really let him have it on that one. It's a very sore point with me because, just to take one example, there was a line in Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid where Butch said, "I got vision and the rest of the world wears bifocals." And one of my genius producers says, "That line's got to go." I don't put my name on this movie with that line in it. And I said, "Why?" And he said, "They didn't talk like that then. It's anachronistic." I remember explaining, Ben Franklin wore bifocals. Ty Cobb was batting champion of the American League when these guys were around. My mother was alive when these guys were alive, and she wore bifocals. We shook hands and ended enemies, but the line stayed in the picture. And so here the point is, if Max and Valerie sound Jewish, why shouldn't they? You think a guy named Simon Morgenstern was Irish Catholic? Funny thing, Morgenstern's folks were named Max and Valerie, and his father was a doctor. Life imitating art. Art imitating life. I really get these two confused, sort of like I can never remember if Claret is Bordeaux wine or Burgundy. They both taste good is the only thing that really matters, I guess, and so does Morgenstern, and we'll pick it up again later, 13 hours later to be precise, 4 in the afternoon, 2 hours before the wedding. "You mean that's it?" Inigo said, appalled. "That's it," Max nodded profoundly. He had not been up this long in a stretch since the old days, and he felt terrific. Valerie was so proud. "Beautiful," she said. She turned to Inigo, then, "You sound so disappointed. What did you think a resurrection pill looked like?" "Not like a lump of clay the size of a golf ball," Inigo answered. Me again, the author. Last time this chapter. No, that's not anachronistic either. There were golf balls in Scotland 700 years ago. And not only that, remember, Inigo had studied with Macpherson the Scot. As a matter of fact, everything Morgenstern wrote is historically accurate. Read any decent book on Florinese history. Back to the story. "I usually give them a coating of chocolate at the last minute. It makes them look a lot better," Valerie said. "It must be 4 o'clock, Max said. "Better get the chocolate ready so it'll have time to harden." Valerie took the lump with her and started down the ladder to the kitchen. "You never did a better job. Smile." "It'll work without a hitch," Inigo said. Max nodded very firmly, but he didn't smile. There was something in the back of his mind bothering him. He never forgot things, not important things. And he didn't forget this either. He just didn't remember it in time. At 4:45, Prince Humperdinck summoned Yellen to his chambers. Yellen came immediately, though he dreaded what was, he knew, about to happen. As a matter of fact, Yellen already had his resignation written and in an envelope in his pocket. "Your Highness," Yellen began. "Report," Prince Humperdinck said. He was dressed brilliantly in white, his wedding costume. He still looked like a mighty barrel, but brighter. "All of your wishes have been carried out, Highness. Personally, I have attended to each detail." He was very tired, Yellen was, and his nerves long past frayed. "Specify," said the prince. He was 75 minutes away from his first female murder, and he wondered if he could get his fingers to her throat before even the start of a scream. He had been practicing on giant sausages all the afternoon, and he had the movements down pretty pat. But then, giant sausages weren't necks, and all the wishing in the world wouldn't make them so. "All the passages to the castle itself have been resealed this very morning," save the main gate. That is now the only way in and the only way out. I have changed the lock to the main gate. There is only one key to the new lock, and I keep it wherever I am. When I am outside with 100 troops, the key is in the outside lock, and no one can leave the castle from the inside. When I am with you, as I am now, the key is in the inside lock, and no one may enter from the outside. Follow, said the prince, and he moved to the large window of his chamber. He pointed outside. Below the window was a lovely planted garden. Beyond that, the prince's private stables. Beyond that, naturally, the outside castle wall. That is how they will come, he said, over the wall, through my stables, past my garden to my window, throttle the queen, and back the way they came before we know it. They, Yellen said, though he knew the answer. The Gueldarians, of course. But the wall where you suggest is the highest wall surrounding all of Florin Castle. It's 50 feet high at that point. So that would seem the least likely point of attack. He was trying desperately to keep himself under control. All the more reason why they should choose this spot. Besides, the world knows that the Gueldarians are unsurpassed as climbers. Yellen had never heard that. He had always thought the Swiss were the ones who were unsurpassed as climbers. Highness, he said, in one last attempt, I have not yet from a single spy heard a single word about a single plot against the princess. I have it on unimpeachable authority that there will be an attempt made to strangle the princess this very night. In that case, Yellen said, and he dropped to one knee and held out the envelope, I must resign. It was a difficult decision. The Yellens had headed enforcement in Florin for generations, and they took their work more than seriously. I am not doing a capable job, sire. Please forgive me, and believe me when I say that my failures were those of the body and mind and not of the heart. Prince Humperdinck found himself, quite suddenly, in a genuine pickle. For once the war was finished, he needed somebody to stay in Guilder and run it, since he couldn't be in two places at once, and the only men he trusted were Yellen and the Count. And the Count would never take the job, being obsessed, as he was in these days, with finishing his stupid pain primer. I do not accept your resignation. You are doing a capable job. There is no plot. I shall slaughter the queen myself this very evening. You shall run Guilder for me after the war. Now get back on your feet. Yellen didn't know what to say. Thank you seemed so inadequate, but it was all he could come up with. Once the wedding is done with, I shall send her here to make ready while I shall, with boots carefully procured in advance, make tracks leading from the wall to the bedroom and returning then from the bedroom to the wall. Since you are in charge of law enforcement, I expect you will not take long to verify my fears that the prince could only be made by the boots of Gueldarian soldiers. Once we have that, we'll need a royal proclamation or two. My father can resign as being unfit for battle, and you, dear Yellen, will soon be living in Guilder Castle. Yellen knew a dismissal speech when he heard one. I leave with no thought in my heart but to serve you. Thank you, Humperdinck said, pleased, because, after all, loyalty was one thing you couldn't buy. And in that mood, he said to Yellen by the door, and oh, if you see the albino, tell him he may stand in the back for my wedding. It's quite all right with me. I will, Highness, Yellen said, adding, but I don't know where my cousin is. I went looking for him less than an hour ago, and he was nowhere to be found. The prince understood important news when he heard it, because he wasn't the greatest hunter in the world for nothing, and, even more, because if there was one good thing you could say about the albino, it was that he was always to be found. You don't suppose there is a plot, do you? It's a perfect time. The country celebrates. If Guilder were about to be 500 years old, I know I'd attack then. Will rush to the gate and fight to the death if necessary, Yellen said. Good man, the prince called after him. If there was an attack, it would come at the busiest time, during the wedding, so he would have to move that up. State affairs went slowly, but still he had authority. 6 o'clock was out. He would be married no later than 5:30, or know the reason why. At 5 o'clock, Max and Valerie were in the basement sipping coffee. "You'd better get right to bed," Valerie said. "You look all troubled. You can't stay up all night as if you were a pup." "I'm not tired," Max said, "but you're right about the other." "Tell Mama." Valerie crossed to him and stroked where his hair had been. "It's just I've been remembering about the pill." "It was a beautiful pill, honey. Feel proud." "I think I messed up the amounts, though. Didn't they want an hour? When I doubled the recipe, I didn't do enough. I don't think it'll work over 40 minutes. Valerie moved into his lap. "Let's be honest with each other. Sure, you're a genius, but even a genius gets rusty. You were 3 years out of practice. 40 minutes will be plenty." "I suppose you're right. Anyway, what can we do about it? Down is down." "The pressures you've been under, if it works at all, it'll be a miracle." Max had to agree with her. "A phantasmagoria," he nodded. The man in black was nearly stiff when Fezzik reached the wall. It was almost 5 o'clock, and Fezzik had been carrying the corpse the whole way from Miracle Max's, back street to back street, alleyway to alleyway. It was one of the hardest things he had ever done. Not taxing, he wasn't even winded, but if the pill was just what it looked like, a chocolate lump, then he, Fezzik, was going to have a lifetime of bad dreams of bodies growing stiff between his fingers. When he at last was in the wall shadow, he said to Inigo, "What now?" "We got to see if it's still safe. There might be a trap waiting." It was the same part of the wall that led, shortly, to the zoo in the farthest corner of the castle grounds. But if the albino's body had been discovered, then who knew what was waiting for them? "Should I go up then?" Fezzik asked. "We'll both do it," Inigo replied. Lean him against the wall and help me." Fezzik tilted the man in black so he was in no danger of falling, and waited while Inigo jumped onto his shoulders. Then Fezzik did the climbing. Any crack in the wall was enough for his fingers. The least imperfection was all he needed. He climbed quickly, familiar with it now, and after a moment, Inigo was able to grab a hold of the top and say, "All right, go on back down." So Fezzik returned to the man in black and waited. Inigo crept along the wall top in dead silence. Far across, he could see the castle entrance and the armed soldiers flanking it. And closer at hand was the zoo. And off in the deepest brush, in the farthest corner of the wall, he could make out the still body of the albino. Nothing had changed at all. There they were, at least, so far safe. He gestured down to Fezzik, who scissored the man in black between his legs, and began the arm climb noiselessly. When they were all together on the top of the wall, Inigo stretched out the dead man, and then hurried along until he could get a better view of the main gate. The walk from the outer wall to the main castle gate was slanted slightly down, not much of an incline, but a steady one. There must be, Inigo did a quick count, at least 100 men standing at the ready. And the time must be, he estimated closely, 5 after 5 now, perhaps close to 10. 50 minutes till the wedding. Inigo turned, then hurried back to Fezzik. "I think we should give him the pill," he said. "It must be around 45 minutes till the ceremony." "That means he's only got 15 minutes to escape with," Fezzik said. "I think we should wait until at least 5:30, half before, half after." "No," Inigo said. "We're going to stop the wedding before it happens. That's the best way, at least to my mind, before they're all set. In the hustle and bustle beforehand, that's when we should strike." Fezzik had no further rebuttal. "Anyway," Inigo said, "we don't know how long it takes to swallow something like this." "I could never get it down myself, I know that." "We'll have to force feed him," Inigo said, unwrapping the chocolate-colored lump. "Like a stuffed goose. Put your hands around his neck and kind of push it down into whatever comes next." "I'm with you, Inigo," Fezzik said. "Just tell me what to do." "Let's get him in a sitting position. I think, don't you? I always find it's easier swallowing sitting up than lying down." "We'll have to really work at it," Fezzik said. "He's completely stiff by now. I don't think he'll bend easy at all." "You can make him," Inigo said. "I always have confidence in you, Fezzik." "Thank you," Fezzik said. "Just don't ever leave me alone." He pulled the corpse between them and tried to make him bend in half, but the man in black was so stiff, Fezzik really had to perspire to get him at right angles. How long do you think we'll have to wait before we know if the miracle's on or not? Your guess is as good as mine, Inigo said. Get his mouth as wide open as you can and tilt his head back a little, and we'll just drop it in and see. Fezzik worked at the dead man's mouth a while, got it the way Inigo said, tilted the neck perfect the first time, and Inigo knelt directly above the cavity and dropped the pill down. And as it hit the throat, he heard, "Couldn't beat me alone, you dastards. Well, I beat you each apart. I'll beat you both together." Nope, sorry, wrong voice. "Couldn't beat me alone, you dastards. Well, I beat you each apart. I'll beat you both together." "You're alive," Fezzik cried. The man in black sat immobile, like a ventriloquist dummy, just his mouth moving. That is perhaps the most childly, obvious remark I have ever come across. But what can you expect from a strangler? Why won't my arms move? You've been dead, Inigo explained. And we're not strangling you, Fezzik explained. We were just getting the pill down. The resurrection pill, Inigo said. I bought it from Miracle Max and it works for 60 minutes. What happens after 60 minutes? Do I die again? It wasn't strictly minutes. He just thought it was. Actually, it was 45. Only they had used up one already in conversation, so it was down to 39. Oh, actually, it was 40. Yeah, and they had used one already in conversation, so it was down to 39. We don't know. Probably you just collapse and need tending for a year or however long it takes for you to get your strength back. I wish I could remember what it was like when I was dead, the man in black said. I'd write it all down. I could make a fortune on a book like that. I can't move my legs either. That will come. You're supposed to. Max said the tongue and the brain were shoo-ins, and probably you'd be able to move, but slowly. The last thing I remember was dying, so why am I on this wall? Are we enemies? Have you got names? I'm the Dread Pirate Roberts, but you can call me Wesley. Fezzik. Inigo Montoya of Spain. Let me tell you what's been going on. He stopped and shook his head. No, he said, there's too much. It would take too long. Let me distill it for you. The wedding is at 6, which leaves us probably now something over a half an hour to get in, steal the girl, and get out, but not before I kill Count Rugen. What are our liabilities? There is but one working castle gate, and it is guarded by perhaps 100 men. Wesley said, not as unhappy as he might have been ordinarily, because just then he began to be able to wiggle his toes. And our assets? Your brains, Fezzik's. Your brains, Fezzik's strength, my steel. Wesley stopped wiggling his toes. That's all? That's it? Everything? The grand total? Inigo tried to explain. We've been operating under a terrible time pressure from the very beginning. Just yesterday morning, for example, I was a hopeless drunk, and Fezzik toiled for the brute squad. It's impossible, Wesley cried. I am Inigo Montoya, and I do not accept defeat. You will think of something. I have complete confidence in you. She's going to marry Humperdinck, and I am helpless. Wesley said, in blind despair, lay me down again. Leave me alone. You're giving in too easily. We fought monsters to reach you. We risked everything because you have brains to conquer problems. I have complete and absolute total confidence that you... I want to die. I want to die, Wesley whispered, and he closed his eyes. If I had had a month to plan, maybe. I might come up with something. But this... His head rocked from side to side. I'm sorry. Leave me. You just moved your own head, Fezzik said, doing his best to be cheery. Doesn't that up your spirits? My brains, your strength, and his steel against 100 troops? And you think a little head jiggle is supposed to make me happy? Why didn't you leave me to death? This is worse. Lying here helpless while my true love marries my murderer? I just know once you're over your emotional outburst, you'll come up with... if we even had a wheelbarrow, that would be something, Wesley said. Where did we put that wheelbarrow the albino had? Inigo said. Over by the albino, I think, Fezzik replied. Maybe we can get a wheelbarrow, Inigo said. Well, why didn't you list that among our assets in the first place? Wesley said, sitting up, staring out at the massed troops in the distance. You just sat up, Fezzik said, still trying to be cheery. Wesley continued to stare at the troops and the incline leading down towards them. He shook his head. What I'd give for a Holocaust cloak, he said. There we can help you, Inigo said. Will this do? Fezzik wondered, pulling out his Holocaust cloak. Where? Inigo began. While you were after frog dust, Fezzik answered. It fit so nicely I just tucked it away and kept it. Wesley got to his feet then. All right, I'll need a sword eventually. Why? Inigo asked. You can barely lift one. True, Wesley agreed, but that is hardly common knowledge. Hear me now. There may be problems once we're inside. I'll say there may be problems, Inigo cut in. How do we stop the wedding? Once we do, how do I find a count? Once I do, where will I find you again? Once we're together, how do we escape? Once we escape... Don't pester him with so many questions, Fezzik said. Take it easy, he's been dead. Right, sorry, Inigo said. The man in black was moving very slowly along the top of the wall. By himself. Fezzik and Inigo watched him through the darkness in the direction of the wheelbarrow. Followed him through the darkness in the direction of the wheelbarrow. There was no denying the fact that there was a certain excitement in the air. Buttercup, for her part, felt no excitement whatsoever. She had, in fact, never remembered such a wonderful feeling of calm. Her Wesley was coming. That was her world. Ever since the prince had dragged her to her room, she had spent the intervening hours thinking of ways to make Wesley happy. There was no way he could miss stopping her wedding. That was the only thought that could survive the trip across her conscious mind. So, when she heard the wedding was to be moved up, she wasn't the least upset. Wesley was always prepared for contingencies. And if he could rescue her at 6, he could just as happily rescue her at 5:30. Actually, Prince Humperdinck got things going even faster than he had hoped. It was 5:23 when he and his bride-to-be were kneeling before the aged Archdean of Florin. It was 5:24 when the Archdean started to speak, and 5:25 when the screaming started outside the main gate. Buttercup only smiled softly. Here comes my Wesley now, was all she thought. It was not, in point of fact, her Wesley that was causing the commotion out front. Wesley was doing all he could to simply walk straight down the incline towards the main gate without help. Ahead of him, Inigo struggled with the heavy wheelbarrow. The reason for its weight was that Fezzik stood in it, arms wide, eyes blazing, and voice booming in terrible rage. I am the dread pirate Roberts, and there will be no survivors. He said that over and over, his voice echoing and reverberating as his rage increased. He was, standing there, gliding down through the darkness, quite an imposing figure, seeming, all in all, probably close to 10 feet tall, with a voice to match. But even that was not the cause of the screaming. Yellen, from his position by the gate, was reasonably upset at the roaring giant gliding down towards them through the darkness. Not that he doubted his 100 men could dispatch the giant. The upsetting thing, though, was, of course, the giant would be aware of that too, and logically there must, somewhere in the dimness out there, be any number of giant helpers. Other pirates, anything. Who could tell? Still, his men held together remarkably staunchly. It was only when the giant got halfway down the incline that he suddenly happily burst into flame and continued his trip saying, No survivors! No survivors! In a manner that could only indicate deadly sincerity. It was seeing him happily burning and advancing that started the brute squad to screaming. And once that happened, why, everybody panicked and ran.